Hey, what's up, everybody? Just really wanted to do this video. I've been actually wanting to do this video for a while now, and kind of excited to talk about it. And I really just don't know exactly what's going to come up in this conversation, just like all my other videos. They're impromptu videos. Um, so I try to. The reason I keep saying that, if you're wondering why I keep saying that in the beginning of my video, it's just that like if I stumble over my words, which I do sometimes, and if I make a error or a mistake, people aren't going to be like, hammering me because of it. I mean, people probably still will anyways. Um, but and just to kind of like remind people, that I want this video to be organic, or this channel to be organic and to answer questions um, for people and for Christians that they might be tough questions, and also for non-Christians. And I just want the channel to be entertaining as well. And hopefully my mistakes will be a part of the entertainment, and so we can laugh at ourselves. And I think a lot of YouTube is too serious, but so yeah, just my channel is me with my iPad, chilling and talking about stuff. So today's topic of discussion is environmentalism and Christianity, and how do they go together? Um, or do they not go together? Are they contradictions? Um, so, man, there's a lot of potential places we could go. I think what the world tells us today, if you look at it in a really simplistic way, is that on the one hand, environmentalism is more where the secular worldview comes from. Like secular people appreciate the environment more than maybe Christians, right? And Christians are kind of and I'm not saying this is true. I'm saying this is kind of what the world makes it sound like. And Christians are more of the ones who have like been known for, in the name of God, conquering and plundering the earth and stuff. So, which, I think that's a little bit of, that's tying in with the overarching. If you've been watching my channel now for a long time, you've kind of maybe been having a picture build up of an overarching caricature of what the world is looking at Christianity as actually being. But so yeah, you have the secular world, um, takes care of the environment, they care about the world, and then you have Christianity, hates the world and wants to just keep building and plundering the earth, to establish like the kingdom of God or something. Um, so yeah, and that is not there by accident. That is a product of decades of environmental thinking, which emerged from criticism and theory, and predominantly Marxist criticism and theory. So if you remember our conversations about Marxism, basically throughout the decades that followed Marxism, there and in modernism and postmodernism, there were different theories that and genres of criticism that were emerging kind of in the decades. There was, like feminist theory, and then there wasn't just one wave of feminist theory. There was like three different waves, and then gender theory. So like, kind of the way that the LGBTQ look at gender today. There's a bunch of different genders, right? And that kind of emerges from gender theory and like critical race theory and different types of theories. And so one of the theories was eco criticism, so ecological theory, and that, just like feminism and gender and race theory, came in different waves, and in each different wave became more radicalized, um, with like through every decade it got more radicalized. And so I think, and I'm not, it's been a long time since I've visited this information, so I'm doing a lot of this from recollection. But I'm not going to remember like who was in the second and third wave, but one of the first wave, um, eco critics or ecological writers was Edward Abbey. Edward Abbey, and he has a book called Desert Solitaire, which I actually have, that I actually enjoy. I do like that book, and I enjoy some aspects of these writings in the different waves as well, but kind of, I think in the later waves it became too chaotic, too confusing, too postmodernist, um, too like haughty, intellectually haughty, and not like HOTTY, but HAUGHTY, like prideful. So yeah, Edward Abbey, his writing. One of my favorite national parks is Arches National Park, and I always used to go there as a kid. So his book Desert Solitaire, and I think he has another book called The Monkey Wrench Gang, where basically they would go and sabotage construction sites and stuff in these places where they were trying to preserve the wilderness, etc. But Edward Abbey was a very good writer, a very talented poet and eco critic and thinker. And I think like now, if I read his writings, I'd probably disagree with some stuff. But yeah, let's see, Desert Solitaire. A lot of it takes place in Arches because he was a ranger in Arches and a very strong. Uh, he really cared about Arches being preserved. There's a story about him watching as like I said, I'm recalling a lot of this, as people were coming in to survey for the new road that goes into Arches, which now it's there. If anybody's been to Arches, you know what I'm talking about. And he was watching them survey for this new road, and he was a ranger, so it was his job to. I think he was a ranger. He might not. He might have been something else, but it was his job to like stay in Arches, and watch over it. When at this point it was in the 30s, I believe, there was nobody that went into Arches. It was really like not a lot of people traveling it. Or maybe he wrote it. I think he might have wrote the book in the 50s, and he was recalling things that happened in the 30s. You can correct me if I'm wrong. So anyways, seeing people surveying a road, and then he ends up like during the night going out and pulling out all the survey sticks to sabotage the the work that they put in, because he believed that there shouldn't be a road into Arches. And I got to tell you, going to Arches and seeing just how overpopulated it is, it's kind of a bummer, because I remember when I was a kid, just like how fun it was, and now you can never get a camping site at Arches. It's really hard. Um, so anyways, hopefully I didn't just blow up Arches even more. But so yeah, that was a big tangent about Edward Abbey. But hey, if people want to watch my video, they can. If they don't have to. So basically, like I said, throughout the different waves, just like with every other wave of criticism, it gets more and more radicalized. Um, and so I learned a lot of this stuff in eco criticism class when I was in college. I went to college for a English degree, and I was very interested in theory and criticism. So that was one of my biggest interests. I was dazzled by the intellect of a lot of the writers, and the propensity for them to use words, like use very big words, um, and and I thought that they were also big ideas, but now kind of looking at them, I think that they were big words with small ideas. And then I look at writers, and I don't want to draw this conclusion for all of them, but I look at writers like maybe C.S. Lewis, somebody who used small words but had big ideas, right? And but anyways, that's neither here nor there, and I'm not saying none of these critics had big ideas, because I don't think that's true. I think a lot of them did have big ideas. I mean, Marx had big ideas, big bad ideas, that resulted in the deaths of lots of people. Not saying that it was Marx's fault directly, but you kind of got to own up to what your ideas led to in history. So, anyways, this eco criticism class was really interesting. It was with a professor that I really respected, and looking back, I know he was a Marxist, and me and him me and him would often have conversations after class and talk about criticism, talk about theories, and this was before I was a Christian, but I just heard something outside. There's something outside my window. Um, Anyways, it might be a deer. I live in the mountains, so it could be a deer, or moose, or a person. I don't know. Sorry. So, anyways, where was I? Oh yeah. So my professor in this eco-criticism class, um, I remember one of the things I remember from the class was that we read an article, or one of the essays that we read was about Christianity being pretty much the problem for why we are in the place that we are in. So one of the ideas of eco-criticism is that when man came into the, and you can kind of look at this through a little bit of truth. I mean, there's a little bit of truth in every lie, right? And when you look at this, you can see like when man sinned and fell, the creation was corrupted, and in Romans chapter 8, it talks about this the creation being subjected to frustration. So it seems to show in the Bible even that the world is decaying. All throughout the Bible, you had different instances of famines, of sicknesses, of illnesses, of droughts, of storms, of floods, of catastrophism. And so, these things, and I'm not saying that doesn't mean there's not climate change right now or anything like that, because, I see things changing just locally where I live in Utah. I see less water. The Great Salt Lake in Salt Lake City is diminishing. It's lowering. But that's basically happening because the town is so well, maybe not overpopulated, but it's so populated. And basically, when they settled Salt Lake City, the pioneers came here, and when they saw the valley, it was a desert. There weren't any trees. But now, if you look out over the Salt Lake Valley, there's trees everywhere. And so people are, they have their lawns, they're watering their lawns, but basically all the water they get come from the Wasatch Mountains. And the population's been growing for decades and decades. It's been growing since Salt Lake was first established back in the mid to late 1800s. And so anyways, now, you kind of see, and I live higher in the mountains, so we're not really in a drought where we are. We actually have a good amount of water so far. And we actually had a good snow year, so that gave us a lot more water. And I'm not just saying this to talk. I'm talking about, like, this is tying into it, to the degree that like environmental alarmism is really actually something that we should be talking about. And just because we're like Christians doesn't mean we should be in like the camp of saying it's all a hoax, none of it's real, because I think then we're just feeding into that caricature of ourselves. But I think what we should be doing is looking at, just like through everything else, looking at it with a discerning mind, and seeing how we apply the Christian lens to the way we look at caring for the environment and being stewards of this earth. So that goes back to what my story about what my professor asked. We read this essay, and it was basically placing the blame of like where we at with the world. The world's dying, and it's Christianity's fault, right? Just like everything else is the Christian's fault, right? And so the professor at one point asked, like, do any of you know what the Christian response to this would be? And not in like a derogatory way. He asked it in a respectful way, right? And we were all just like, we were just 20-year-old students and didn't really care. And he's like, well, maybe you're all atheists, but it's actually the notion of stewardship. And so he kind of talked about the Christian perspective in a respectful way, and not saying like Christians think that there's a stewardship thing, and So I'm sure some professors might do it in that way. Um, but maybe the professor was like wise enough to catch on to that caricaturing that was happening in some of those essays a little bit, and to say like, hey, and maybe he knew more than we did, and like wasn't buying into that whole it's all Christianity's fault mentality, um, which it's not, as we'll see in this conversation. I'm hoping that we'll get into that. So, anyways, I would say, like I said, in these videos, I just start and I don't really know what I'm going to say before I start talking. But I think we've covered a lot of ground so far. But like I said, just locally, probably where you are, you see the landscape changing, you see things happening, and we know that things are changing, and humans do change the landscape around us. And so to deny that, I think altogether is foolish. Um, so I think as Christians, we should look at these things with a couple of different things in mind. First of all, seeing it like I just said, that admitting that something is happening, um, and also with the recognition that we do affect the world around us, and but I think we also should keep that in perspective with uh, with the fact that things have changed in the past and will change in the future, and that it's not just us now that are changing it. And eco-criticism, the eco-critical movement, recognizes this too. They actually don't see just us now as being the problem. They saw the first time that people started moving towards industry as, that was when we started, when the nature versus culture aspect were merged, and so then after that, with the pastoral, and then with the industrial, and with all these other different stages of human development, like, and even if you look back all the way through history to the Sumerian culture, um, there was always mankind was always building. Mankind was always changing the landscape in one way or another. But they saw that, they saw all of this as being culture integrated with nature, and they even viewed the words like nature and wilderness as um, not being quite proper to describe what is. But and so that you can see that there's kind of like some political correctness coming in there that they're trying to use, so that when you talk about ecology, environmentalism, you're not really allowed to say anything without being flagged for saying something wrong, right? Um, I don't know if that made sense, but anyways, yeah. So there were different developments and stages, just like there were different stages to this theory of criticism, and so I was really interested in it, and I was really passionate about it. But I think one of the problems that really emerged from the eco-critical phase that I went through, which I still do really care about, how I treat the environment. I try to conserve water. I try not to use a bunch of electricity. I do like live in the mountains, so I have to drive pretty far to get gas, but I try to drive less. I'm not doing this to pat myself on the back, but I'm just saying, like, you know, Christians don't just, we're not just throwing away as much stuff as we can. We a lot of us really care. Um, so, anyways, and but I don't think so. So that goes back with what I was saying, with what the eco-critical phase that I was going through was kind of leading me into, and it was like starting to lead me into this deep resentment for humanity. And like I said, this was before I was a Christian, because basically I saw humanity as like the biggest threat to the world, which it very well might be. Um, and I saw it as I saw all these people driving around and doing things as like futility, and ultimately saying like, don't these people know that they're just destroying the world around them? And it was like a constant, um, it was constantly raising my level of awareness for the environment being affected. And so then and then I started preaching to people about it all the time. Sorry, there's like some. Hopefully that wasn't there the whole time. I know my beard is like getting out of control. I need to do something with it. Anyways, I like it. It's kind of like looked like a biblical beard. So anyways, I started judging people. I started kind of being resentful, seeing myself as like more altruistic than others because I had this deep caring for the environment. And I remember one thing in the eco criticism class that was sort of a red flag for me, but didn't really think about it too hard because I wasn't able to think very critically in college, which a lot of people aren't, unfortunately. They just kind of absorb whatever's being given to them. But I said, I heard my professor say the only way out is suicide. Basically, what he meant was not saying go kill yourself, but what he meant was like, as a human species, we have overpopulated the planet and we are destroying it, and the only way for the planet to continue living is suicide. And so that, that's a red flag right there for us as Christians. And that, so what I'm saying, and many Christians and maybe even many people in the environmental movement do not recognize that is what the elite, like the highest of the high point where the eco-critical movement is leading to, is ultimately to like a condemnation of the human species and the recognition that we need to die. And so, man, there's so many things we could talk about with this, and so I think this might be a longer video, but I think it's important. This is a big question for a lot of Christians. But anyways, so now what you see, I've been watching the Planet Earth series, and what you see with the Planet Earth series is in one of them, they have all the people who directed the series and world leaders, and now you have this globalized push towards like, I can't remember what it's called, like the green movement or whatever, and trying to get all these different countries on board with this green movement, which I think is very counterintuitive in a lot of ways. One of the things is that they want to completely rebuild the entire infrastructure of like the entire world. So it makes you wonder, like, okay, well, if you're trying to preserve resources, how is like plundering the earth in order to rebuild the entire world once over going to be an effective way to preserve resources and to save the planet? So to me, it just seems like kind of counterintuitive and redundant. And I think a lot of these people in power who are preaching about, I do think there are a lot, like I have a family member who is very conscientious, and she really is so passionate about it, which I can deeply commend and respect. But I think a lot of the people in power pretend to be passionate about it, but they really know that it is an opportunity for them to capitalize and to really gain more power over people. So and so that green movement is an opportunity to be kind of a global unifier for people, and it's one of those things where they propose it, and if you dissent from it, or if you like criticize it at all, it's one of those things like, oh, you criticize it, you are evil, you want to destroy the planet, right? But it's not necessarily that. It's just that many people see things like that. Pushes towards globalization, and we rightly are concerned about it. So, especially when the methods that they and the policies they want to impose are counterintuitive. So, anyways, I can't remember where I was going with that. But you have so you have this push towards globalization, and then I was talking about Planet Earth. So you have a lot of these world leaders that are kind of talking about this, and you know that some of these thought leaders, these intellectuals, are leading this push towards globalization and push towards more of a an overarching plan to preserve the environment. But I think a lot of them have another agenda, right? Like they have ulterior motives. And but in this Planet Earth series, they were talking about population control. They were talking about reducing the population. And I think like what it comes down to is like in order to reduce the population, you have to do things that are pushing against people's rights. You have to restrict their rights to have children. And in some cases, you may have to sterilize them. And sterilization is not out of the reach of the human capacity. In America, there was forced sterilizations for decades in the 20th century. Eugenicists imposed forced sterilizations, and in California, they sterilized people all the way up through the 70s. So to say that like these ideas are way behind us is I think it's kind of naive and does us a disservice if we don't recognize these things. So anyways, yeah, they're talking about population control, right? We got to lower our population or the world's going to die. Well, of course, that sounds great on the surface, but it ultimately, what I say ultimately too much. Okay. But what it does is it brings, let me think for a minute. So the population control, there's only one way to do it. It's if you start forcing people to control the population. It's if you start pushing on people's rights to have children in the name of the greater good. And we know that the path to HE double hockey sticks, I'm not even going to swear in my videos because I don't want to get censored. But the path to Sheol is paved with good intentions. And we've seen that before with intellectuals having an idea for the greater good, and ultimately what it leads to is danger. And so some of these people were even talking about reproductive health. So that should set off an alarm for red flags, or set off red flags for Christians as well. Sorry, it's late. I'm a little tired, but I wanted to talk about this. So, and I think it's going to be good, even if I stumble over my words a little bit more than normal but anyways, that should set off red flags too, because what does reproductive health mean? What does that, if you're a Christian, what does that connote? Birth control, abortion. So if they're going to start promoting reproductive health, does that mean, how are you going to do that more than it's already been being done? I mean, abortion in America is already pushed to like the most extreme place that it can be pushed to, just about. What about like people who are a drain on society, like in Hitler's days, who are useless eaters? I mean, we have to start preserving food, guys. So people like my mom who can't work, can't be productive members of society, are they less valuable? So this gets into the whole like a whole philosophical conundrum for atheism and the evolutionary perspective again with social Darwinism that's reemerging now in this new age that was back in the progressive era of the 20th century. But it's reemerging again because that's the worldview is social Darwinism. And in that worldview, it's an achievement-based value. So if you are a, CEO of a billion-dollar company and you have all these things going on, you have more value in the social Darwinist perspective than the bum on the street. And if you are an able-bodied person, you have more value than a disabled person, and that was the way the Nazis viewed people. And these things like euthanasia they tried to bring it into the West, and I think some people still agree with that. So the problem is when you start pushing to like control the population, are you going to start looking at people's various values in society and how it might better the environment in the future if we just kind of like get rid of these people because like, hey, what are they doing for us anyways? And I think if we just look at the world through a mode of self-preservation in that way, and that is that is evil, because as Christians we understand that everybody's been designated with value, and I look at my mom as having just as much value as me, even though she can't do the things that I can do. So anyways, yeah, we see problems when you start talking about population control, when you start talking about reproduction control, and because those have implications of eugenics and abortion and euthanasia and sterilization and all these really evil things that we saw in the 20th century, and we saw a bunch of evils come out of them. So it comes from a philosophy of of just our values get all out of whack when we start looking at in things in this way, and going back to the ecological foundation for all this, the eco-critical foundation for all this, these ideas have emerged throughout the last couple of decades, and have brought us to where we are now, and now that's why we have intellectuals and politicians and CEOs and people saying these things, and they're echoing the intellectuals who progressed the eco-critical movement up to the point of the realization, like my philosophy professor said, that the only way out is the only way out. It's suicide, right? As a collective human species, and that's the only way to preserve the planet. And so that is the height. At least when I was in college, which was like 6 years ago, that was the height of what the eco-critical movement had brought us to. It brought us to suicide, and so that's an alarming idea. So as Christians, we should recognize that there are problems that need to be solved, and not say like, oh, it's all invisible and it's not there. We need to recognize that. We also need to recognize recognize God's sovereignty in it, and we need to recognize that He is in control, and ultimately He does have the power to bring droughts and famine, and He has the power to bring prosperity to lands and nations, even in the Bible. And so we want to look at the Bible for some of the answers to these things, and obviously not say everything in the Bible is just happening the same way now, and it has to be the same way. But lots of times in the Bible, God would bring drought and famine and other things because of people's rebellion. So I think that looking at it from the idea of the world corruption, from the idea of sin corrupting everything, is an important part of it, and I don't think it's an unrealistic stretch of imagination to come to those conclusions that sin is one of the reasons why, if not the reason why, we are in the predicament that we're in. Because beforehand, that the relationship between humankind and nature, like in Eden with the stewardship, there was a harmony between man and creation, and then suddenly everything got distorted after the fall, and that harmony was perverted. And I think that's why even the eco-critical movement, looking at it through a secular lens, recognizes that from the beginning, that mankind learned how to use tools and learned how to start how to start manipulating the landscape. From the beginning, it was there. From the beginning, the world was doomed. And so, from a biblical perspective, that actually works out because we know that just like we're mortal, the world itself is mortal. Um, Sorry, I just thought I heard a gunshot outside, but I don't know what that was. Okay, so I'm trying to think of what other ground I covered. So as Christians, we should look at the fact that it is real. We should also be concerned about some of the policies and implementations that people are doing. We should also recognize that there is a huge stake of interest for a lot of the people who proclaim the most and preach the most about this stuff. There's oftentimes a huge financial incentive and also a big power play and an opportunity for politicians to gain a huge base of support just for espousing the latest ecological ideas. So that's another problem. And we should also recognize that it is our duties as Christians to be stewards of the land and to really care about what we use and to be the salt of the earth, right? And that means the preservative. So we are to preserve the earth and to appreciate God's creation. And then last, all right, let me think because I know there's more. I bet there's a dozen more things that we should keep in mind, but for the sake of brevity, I'll probably just think of a couple more. Okay, so in response to my professor's question, what is the Christian's perspective on this? And I've thought about this, like, why didn't I answer? Because I think the answer is that, well, the Christian perspective is to say that we live in God's creation. God created the heavens and the earth. And so the only way to live in a life of reconciliation with the creation is to submit ourselves to the Creator. And that is the way that we're going to be the most effective stewards. Otherwise, we're kind of blindly groping along the walls, thinking we're doing good for the world, but ultimately we end up doing evil, right? And end up messing things up. We end up talking about finding the solution in eugenics. And so recognizing, like, from a Christian perspective, we're not, and some Christians have acted not in line with this and have not been good stewards. So like owning up maybe to the mistakes made, but also recognizing, like, hey, well, doesn't it make sense, like, if the Christian worldview is true, that the Creator, being in relationship with the Creator, he's going to instill in you a love and appreciation for the creation. And so I think that actually does work pretty well. So this is another problem with the totally secular lens on environmentalism, is that it emerges. I'm going to go back to the social Darwinist perspective for a minute, and this also ties into why human beings, I think, especially in the 20th century, found the height of their propensity to kill, steal, and destroy in the various world wars, in the eugenic movement, in the abortion movement, and it came from a misunderstanding of value and a certain nihilism that emerged out of just thinking that we are bacteria growing on a plant, growing on a rock in space. And so that idea of, like, I think that idea is in the back of people's mind, and that's kind of fueling this I'm not going to say a false, I want to be careful what I say here, but I'm not going to say a false sense of urgency, because I think there is an urgency, but I'm saying, like, a faulty motivation, and a false sense of, like, reality, because we all know that even people who I think ascribe to that worldview, that they are just bacteria growing on a planet, don't actually believe that in their heart of hearts. They know that they have value and they have dignity, and so this just goes to a simple question of value. Because through a pantheistic, atheistic or social Darwinist lens, there really is no objective way that we can ascribe more value to a chicken or a human being. And I think that was one of the things that the eco-critical movement actually understood. They would talk. There was a book called "The Ecological Thought" by Timothy Morton, and in it he talks about the strange stranger, like a spider, and recognizing that a spider, that we all exist in this web of interconnectivity, and ultimately these beings, these other creatures that are alive have just as much value as we do. So like a spider has as much value as a human, or but then you could just say like, okay, well then a germ, because you, if you're being logically consistent with that, there's no way to ascribe any more or less value to anything. So this roll of toilet paper, technically, I mean it's just, we're all just matter in motion. Consciousness is an illusion, and there's not really any more value to anything than anything else. So, but we know that that's not true. Even the most staunch atheists recognize, like, if you were to force them to kill either a chicken or a human being, they would kill the chicken, right? But what I'm saying is, like, from a purely pantheistic or atheistic or social Darwinist worldview, there's no objective way to make sense of that. But in the Christian world, we do have an objective way to make sense of that. We know that that there are different levels of value to different creatures, and I think that understanding is kind of instilled in us without like having to be educated about it. Like if you put a 4-year-old and you say, okay, sorry, I'm just gonna do this as a thought experiment. I'm not trying to be morbid or anything, but if you say you have to kill this kitten, or you can kill this ant, which one are they going to kill? Well, they're going to kill the ant because they understand that the kitten is, obviously they wouldn't want to kill either of them, um, but they understand that the kitten is more complex. It is more valuable. So I think the atheistic response to that would be that, well, as human beings, we've just kind of made up that value and we've just created a relative value for those things. But I think it's a major conundrum, and I think that if we understand that total relativity of value and moral relativity, which also becomes an intellectual relativity where there is no higher or lower truth. These different substrata of relativities are actually one of the fueling um, motivators for the eco-critical movement. They're one of the motivators for where we're going with that movement, and that's one of the reasons why there is a concern among conservatives and Christians about the eco-critical movement. It's not just because we want to plunder and destroy the world, but it's because of like some of the deeper ideas of the philosophy, um, and also when you include like envy and pride and greed and selfishness and lust and all the negative aspects of the human nature into this desire uh, to unify everyone in a globalized way, and put it under the guise of like being environmentally conscientious, then you start running into problems. And so I think as Christians, we do need to recognize like, hey, there is a problem, and we need to be a part of the solution, and find real solutions to it, but also recognize there is a problem within the way that the ones who claim to be the biggest solutions to the problem see themselves as the solutions to the problem, and that there are um, fallacies within their motivations, and then we have to look at the you don't have to read every book ever made or every essay ever written about the eco-critical movement, but just kind of understanding some of those ideas that are behind the eco-critical movement, namely that the height of the eco-critical movement ultimately merits the destruction of either all or most of humanity in order to preserve um, our planet's longevity. Um, so yeah, I think that recognizing also as Christians, we recognize like not just saying the new heaven and the new earth, like so we can just kind of do whatever we want now, but we do have that understanding that, you know, things are decaying and things will die, but ultimately like and we it is our job on this planet to be a part of that battle and looking out for the world, but ultimately recognizing like God's sovereignty and that things are going to get worse, which is what the world is showing right now, as we see things changing around us, and as we see humanity contributing to that problem, and also uh, as we see problems within society as well. Um, that all these things are kind of coming together, uh, and they don't contradict the biblical worldview. Because as Paul said in Romans 8, 2,000 years ago, he said the world was subject to frustration, to decay. So the world is decaying. Um, and that's a sad thing. But we know that God's ultimate plan was not for it to decay. His, his plan was to bring restoration to the earth. And I think that is the positive in it all. So, as Christians, having that understanding, I think that really enriches the conversation with people who disagree with us. Um, but some people will not, it's just like with all the other things we've talked about, some people will not tolerate any dissent from either the way they see the the environmental problems or the way that we propose solutions. They will not tolerate dissent because, like I said, a big part of the problem is the pride that is fueling the motivators for people to see themselves as saviors of the world, and that's one of the biggest problems. But we know that in Christ, Christ leads us into all truth, and He leads us into the understanding of God through the Holy Spirit. And so He wants us to see these things and these issues and these problems through the lens of the Spirit, and not to say that we are the only, that people who don't believe the same way we do can't present solutions, but to help people in finding the solutions. But to just is that the right word? Extradite, exclude Christians from the conversations and to blame Christians for all the evil under the sun, as far as environmentalism is concerned, is a complete misunderstanding, and it's just stupid. It's ahistorical. It's stupid. I mean, you look at the 20th century, and basically Europe was essentially destroyed by, by atheistic regimes, by, well, I guess Nazi was both atheistic and pantheistic, but Soviet Russia, Japan, and the world wars came about through this lust for power, and those like did a terrible damage on the planet, probably the most terrible damage that's ever been done. And that was not in the name of Christianity. That was not in the name of Jesus. So I don't really know where people are getting this. I think people get this caricature in their mind because they muddle Christianity in with capitalism, and say, well, Christian capitalists are the problem for the world being in the state that it's in. But that's just not true. I mean, it might have truth in it, but it's not entirely true. It's missing a whole bigger part of the problem. So, anyways, covered a lot of ground, and I think that hopefully that helps present a comprehensive look at the way Christians are to address the problems of environmentalism and the way that we are to look at it, and to look at it through a lens of God's sovereignty, but also not to dismiss the real issues at hand. And So let me know what you think. And thank you for watching this video and this installment. And just remember, there's hope, just like with that discussion on Lord of the Rings and that proverb. Righteousness is like the first gleam of dawn, shining ever brighter until the noonday sun. So sometimes when the darkness is emerging and it seems like all is lost, there is a hope. And that hope for us is in the narrow way. When Jesus carried the cross up to the hill, up to Golgotha, he knew the hope. He was submitted to torture and pain, but he knew the hope of following his Father, that he had followed his Father, and he knew that the righteousness was almost at the full day sun for him. But ultimately, before that happened, darkness came over the land. But we all know the sun rose in both senses of the term. So anyways, hope this was helpful, and God bless you all, and thank you for watching my videos. I hope you are enjoying them so far. Like, comment, and subscribe if you think this video is helpful, or if you know somebody who is pondering this question and you think this might be of some service to them. God bless you. Peace and blessings.